My parents took custody of my son to protect him from me, so I fought back in court and won. The day I learned what they had done, it felt like my entire world collapsed. Parents are supposed to stand beside you, to support you in your darkest moments. Instead, mine had gone behind my back, convinced the judge I was unfit, and ripped my child away from me. My name is Julian, and I am 35 years old. For years, I believed my parents wanted what was best for me and my family. But when my marriage fell apart and I became a single father, their attitude shifted. Suddenly, every mistake I made was magnified, every struggle held against me. They whispered that I was unstable, irresponsible, and incapable of raising my own child. It began one quiet morning when I showed up at their house to pick up my son, who had spent the night with them. Instead of letting him run into my arms, my father stood blocking the doorway, holding an envelope. His expression was stone cold. "Julian," he said, "this isn't easy, but we believe it's for the best. We filed for temporary custody. The court has already approved it." I froze, staring at him in disbelief. You did what?" My voice cracked, my chest tightening as if all the air had been sucked from the world. Inside the envelope were official court papers. My parents had claimed I was unfit, that my home environment was unsafe. They had used my divorce, my financial struggles, and even my long work hours against me. And somehow, without warning, they had convinced the judge to give them temporary custody. And my son peeked out from behind my mother's legs, confused, his little voice trembling as he asked, "Daddy, why are you mad?" That moment broke me. I wanted to scream, to rip the papers apart, to tell my parents they had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable. Instead, I swallowed the rage and told my son softly, "It's okay, buddy. Daddy's here." But inside, I made a silent promise. I would fight. No matter how long, no matter how hard, I would fight to bring my son home. The courthouse felt suffocating the day of the first hearing. My parents sat across the aisle, looking composed, almost righteous, as if they were the heroes swooping in to save my son from me. My mother clutched her pearl necklace, avoiding my gaze, while my father's expression was stone cold, unreadable. Their lawyer stood confidently, painting a grim picture of me. "Your Honor, my clients only seek to protect their grandson. Mr. Julian Thompson has been struggling emotionally after his divorce. He works long hours, his finances are unstable, and his son has been left in less than ideal conditions. The child deserves safety, stability, and care that my clients can provide." I sat there, fists clenched, each word hitting like a punch to the gut. They were using my struggles against me. Yes, I worked long hours. Yes, I had stumbled after the divorce. But never, not once, had I neglected my son. When it was my turn, my lawyer, Ms. Carter, rose to speak. Calm but firm, she countered their narrative. "Your Honor, my client is not unfit. He has a stable home, he provides for his son, and he has never put the child in danger. Divorce is difficult, but it does not make a father incapable of love or care." The judge listened without expression, scribbling notes, asking a few pointed questions. Then, the hammer fell. Not a final decision, but a blow all the same. "Temporary custody will remain with the grandparents until this matter is reviewed further," the judge declared. "Mr. Thompson will have visitation rights supervised." Supervised. The word burned. It was as if I were some criminal, dangerous to my own child. My parents glanced at me then, a flicker of triumph in their eyes. I left the courtroom. My son ran to me in the hallway, wrapping his little arms around my waist. "Daddy, when can I come home?" he asked. I knelt down, hugging him tighter than ever. "Soon, buddy. I promise. Daddy's going to fix this." And though my heart felt crushed, I knew this was only the beginning of a much bigger fight. 2 weeks later, I walked back into the courtroom with a knot in my stomach. I had convinced myself that the worst was behind me, that the judge would see I was a capable father who had just gone through a rough patch. But I was wrong. My parents' lawyer rose with a file in his hand and a confident smirk. "Your Honor," he began, "we have further evidence to demonstrate why custody should remain with my clients." He handed over a series of photographs. I leaned forward, my heart racing as I saw what they were. Messy rooms in my house, an unwashed sink full of dishes, laundry piled in a corner, even an image of my son's toys scattered across the floor. Mr. Thompson's home environment, the lawyer continued smoothly, is clearly unstable and unsanitary. A child deserves a clean, safe, and structured space, not chaos. I clenched my jaw, anger boiling beneath the surface. The photos were real, yes, but they were twisted. Taken on one of the hardest weeks of my life, right after the divorce papers were finalized, when I could barely drag myself out of bed. They didn't show the full picture. They showed one bad moment frozen in time, that I stood to speak, my voice cracking but strong. Your Honor, those photos don't represent my son's life. They represent a father going through a divorce, cleaning up after work, trying to balance everything alone. My son has never gone hungry, never been unsafe, never been unloved. Ms. Carter quickly followed up, adding, "We are prepared to provide testimony from teachers and neighbors who can confirm that the child is well cared for." A messy house in transition is not neglect. The judge frowned, flipping through the photos again. He didn't dismiss them outright, but he didn't look convinced either. Walking out of that hearing, I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. My parents were willing to use even the smallest imperfections in my life as weapons, and I realized something chilling. If they had these photos, what else were they prepared to use against me? The photos haunted me for days. I couldn't understand how my parents had even gotten them. They hadn't been inside my house in months, not since things between us had soured. Then, one evening as I was sifting through old mail, the answer fell into my IT was a letter from my landlord, reminding me that I had given my parents a spare key years ago for emergencies. My stomach twisted. Suddenly, it all made sense. They hadn't just stumbled across those images. They had entered my home without my permission, snapping photos to use against me. Rage surged through me, hot and unrelenting. These weren't just manipulations anymore. This was invasion. Betrayal that I confronted them the very next day. They sat in their living room, acting as if everything was normal, sipping tea. I slammed the landlord's letter down on the coffee table. "You used my key," I said, my voice trembling with fury. "You came into my home and took those pictures, didn't you?" My mother's face paled, but my father didn't even flinch. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "We did what we had to do. You weren't coping, Julian. Someone had to protect your boy." "Protect him?" I barked. "By breaking into my home? By lying to a judge?" My mother's eyes welled with tears, but she stayed silent. My father, though, leaned forward, his tone cold. "If you can't even keep your own house in order, how do you expect to raise a child?" His words stung worse than any insult I'd ever heard. I wanted to shout, to throw every ounce of pain back in his face. But instead, I gathered the letter and stormed out. Later that night, Ms. Carter reassured me. "This is actually in your favor. They broke boundaries, violated trust, and possibly even the law. If we prove this, their credibility weakens." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. My parents thought they had cornered me, but now I had proof they had crossed a line, and I promised myself I would make sure the court saw it too. The next hearing carried a different energy. I walked into the courtroom, clutching the landlord's letter like a weapon. My parents sat across the aisle, their lawyer calm and confident as usual, but I noticed a flicker of unease in my mother's eyes when she saw the folder in my hands. When it was our turn, Ms. Carter rose with measured confidence. "Your Honor, the opposing party has presented photographs of my client's home as evidence of neglect. What they failed to disclose, however, is how those photos were obtained." She handed the judge the landlord's letter. "These pictures were not offered voluntarily, nor were they the result of any lawful inspection. They were taken by the grandparents after entering my client's home without permission, using a key entrusted to them years ago for emergencies only." A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. My father's jaw tightened, and my mother stared at the floor. The judge frowned deeply. "Is this true?" he asked, looking directly at my parents' attorney. The lawyer stammered, clearly caught off guard. "Your Honor, my clients were acting in the best interest of the child. That is not what I asked." The judge cut him off sharply. Did they not enter Mr. Thompson's residence without his knowledge or consent?" The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, my father spoke, his voice low but defiant. We did what we thought was right. The judge's expression hardened. What you did was a violation of privacy. This court will not condone such actions. For the first time, the tide shifted. My parents' image as the noble protectors cracked in front of everyone. They didn't look like guardians anymore. They looked like manipulators willing to cross any line to win. When the hearing ended, I walked out of that courtroom taller than I had in months. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a turning point. The truth had pierced their armor, and I could finally see the cracks forming. But I knew one thing for certain. Cornered animals fight the hardest. And my parents weren't finished. The next hearing opened with a surprise. My parents' lawyer rose, his voice steady and confident once again. Your Honor, today we will present testimony from individuals who have witnessed firsthand why custody should remain with my clients. I frowned, exchanging a quick glance with Ms. Carter. Witnesses? I hadn't expected this. The first was a neighbor from 2 doors down, Mrs. Green, a woman I'd only spoken to a handful of times. She took the stand, her voice shaky but clear. I've seen Julian leave his son with sitters late at night. Sometimes he doesn't come home until morning. I don't think that's the right environment for a child. My chest tightened. She wasn't lying exactly, but she was twisting the truth. Yes, I'd hired sitters during the darkest weeks of my divorce, when I was working double shifts to cover bills. But I had never abandoned my son. He had always been safe, cared for, and loved. Then came the second witness, someone I never expected. My ex-wife. The moment she walked in, my stomach dropped. She looked polished, confident, her eyes cold when they met mine. My parents' lawyer smiled faintly as he asked her to testify. During our marriage, she said smoothly, Julian was often distant, overwhelmed, and unreliable. I worried about his ability to manage even simple responsibilities. After we separated, I feared for how he would cope raising our son alone. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My own ex, my son's mother, had sided with my parents. Whether out of resentment or guilt, I didn't know. But her words cut deeper than anything else. When it was my turn to respond, I stood, my voice shaking but resolute. Your Honor, I will not pretend that divorce didn't break me. It did, but I never once failed my son. I worked long hours to keep a roof over his head. I hired sitters because I wanted him safe when I couldn't be home. I'm not perfect, but I am his father, and I have never abandoned him. Ms. Carter quickly followed up, pointing out the inconsistencies in my ex-wife's testimony and the lack of specifics in my neighbor's claims. But the damage was clear. My parents were pulling every string, dragging every voice they could have stacked the odds against me. Yes, I left the courtroom. I felt the weight of betrayal heavier than ever. Not just from my parents, but from the woman I had once shared my life with. Still, deep inside, one truth remained unshaken. My son deserved his father. And I wasn't going to stop fighting for him. After the crushing blow of my ex-wife's testimony, I felt cornered. It seemed like everyone who could turn against me already had. But sometimes, light comes from the least expected places. The next hearing, just as my parents' lawyer prepared to press their advantage. Ms. Carter stood up. Your Honor, the defense would like to call a witness. I turned to her in confusion. She hadn't mentioned this to me before. Then I saw who walked in. Mrs. Ellis, my son's elementary school teacher. She took the stand with quiet dignity, her voice steady. I've taught Julian's son for 2 years. He is a bright, happy boy. He always comes to class well-fed, prepared, and cared for. When his father picks him up, I see a boy who is comfortable and loved. I've never once had concerns about his well-being under his father's care. The courtroom shifted. For the first time in weeks, the weight on my chest eased. My parents' lawyer tried to rattle her with questions. Mrs. Ellis, are you saying you know what happens inside Mr. Thompson's home? She didn't flinch. I may not see inside his house, but I see the results every single day. A child's well-being is the truest reflection of their home life. And this child is thriving. The judge leaned forward, listening intently. It was the first testimony that didn't come from family, the first unbiased perspective, and it carried weight. After the hearing, I approached Mrs. Ellis, struggling to find words. Why did you do this? I asked softly. She smiled gently. Because your son deserves his father. and because the truth matters. That night, for the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel hope. My parents could twist photos, call in bitter voices from my past, but they couldn't change the way my son truly lived or the people who had seen firsthand. And now, with the tide shifting, I felt the fight turning in my favor. The shift in the courtroom after Mrs. Ellis's testimony was undeniable. For the first time, the judge's questions leaned toward my side. I could feel momentum building, a fragile but real hope that I might finally bring my son home. But my parents weren't finished. At the very next hearing, their lawyer stood and dropped a thick folder on the judge's bench. "Your Honor, we have new evidence that shows why my clients acted as they did." My stomach twisted. What now? Inside the folder were medical records, not mine but my son's. Records of when he had been sick with the flu, when he had fallen at the playground, even a late-night ER visit for a fever. Each incident was listed as though it were proof I was reckless, careless, unfit. I could feel the blood drain from my face as the lawyer spoke. "This child has experienced multiple medical emergencies while under his father's care. Clearly, Mr. Thompson struggles to provide a safe environment." I wanted to explode. Every one of those moments was etched into my memory. I had rushed him to doctors, stayed up all night at his bedside, held his hand through every fever and cough. I hadn't neglected him. I had been there every step of the way. MS. Carter stood slowly, her voice measured but firm. "Your Honor, children get sick. They scrape knees, they catch colds, they fall. What matters is how a parent responds. And these records show one thing clearly. Every time, Mr. Thompson sought immediate care. He didn't ignore these situations. He acted as a responsible, loving father." The judge's gaze was heavy on me. "Mr. Thompson, do you have anything to add?" I rose, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Your Honor, I will never pretend that life as a single parent is easy. But when my son is hurt, I am there. When he's sick, I am there. These records don't prove neglect. They prove that I never leave him to face anything alone." For a moment, the room was silent. My parents sat stiffly, my father's face red with frustration, my mother's eyes glistening with tears she refused to shed. The judge finally leaned back. "Very well. The court will take this into consideration." As we walked out of the courtroom, Ms. Carter whispered, "They're running out of ammunition." This was their last swing, and it wasn't enough. I nodded, but deep inside, I knew one truth. The fight wasn't just about evidence anymore. It was about whether the judge believed in me as a father, and soon, that decision would finally come. The courtroom was silent as the judge shuffled his notes, glasses perched low on his nose. Weeks of hearings, accusations, and betrayals had led to this moment. My heart pounded so hard I thought everyone could hear it. He began slowly, his voice steady but sharp. "This case has been emotionally charged from the beginning. On one side, we have grandparents who claim they acted out of love. On the other, a father fighting for his right to raise his own child. My task is not to weigh emotions, but evidence." He paused, and the air grew heavy. My parents sat rigidly, their lawyer's expression tight, while I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. The judge continued. "The photographs presented by the grandparents were obtained without consent, raising serious questions about judgment and respect for privacy. The medical records, while concerning at first glance, in fact demonstrate that the father sought immediate and appropriate care for his child. Furthermore, credible testimony from the child's teacher paints a picture of a boy who is thriving under his father's care." I held my breath as he set his papers down. Then came the words I had prayed for. "Custody will be returned to Mr. Thompson. The grandparents will have visitation rights, but primary custody belongs with the father. This court sees no grounds to continue questioning his ability to parent." The gavel struck, sharp and final. Relief crashed over me like a wave. My eyes burned, but I refused to blink. Across the aisle, my father's jaw tightened in anger, while my mother's lips quivered, fighting back tears. They had lost. As I walked out of that courtroom, I felt my son's small hand slip into mine. He looked up at me with wide eyes and whispered, "Can I come home now, Daddy?" For the first time in months, I could finally answer with certainty. "Yes, buddy, you're coming home." The first night my son came back home, I watched him fall asleep in his own bed, surrounded by his favorite toys. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, and for the first time in months, I felt whole again. The silence in the house wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. This battle nearly broke me. I never imagined my own parents would stand against me, using lies and half-truths to try and take my child away. I thought parents were meant to protect, not betray. But I've learned something. Sometimes the people you trust most can be the ones who wound you the deepest. Still, I don't carry hatred. Disappointment, yes. Anger, of course. But above all, I feel gratitude for the truth that came out, for the people who stood by me when I needed it most, and for the bond one share with my son that no courtroom can erase. If there's one lesson I'll leave with you, it's this. Never stop fighting for those you love. Even when the odds are stacked against you, even when the people closest to you turn their backs, hold on to the truth. It may take time, but the truth has a way of cutting through every lie. And to those of you who've listened all the way to the end of my story, thank you. Your support means more than you know. If my journey resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you subscribed and left a like. It helps me keep sharing stories like this, so that no one fighting a battle like mine ever feels alone.